So, before we get started, you're probably seeing this before I actually hit 10,000 subscribers. There's two reasons for that. One. Thanks, Bob. One. I wanted to get back to some positivity on the channel after how negative the last video was and how controversial some of the responses were. So I wanted to get some positivity back as soon as I could. And also, it was suggested to me by one of my Discord mods that, remember that poll I set up a little while ago, where you all voted for this particular Plague guide to be what I do for 10,000 subscribers? I thought, I'm in no rush. Why not do all three? So, in the comments of this video, and in the community poll I'm putting up as soon as it goes live, you can ask me anything you want. Just give me a question, and I will do my best to answer as many of them as I can. Ideally, keep it away from lore-specific, specific lore-based questions. Ask me if I've got a certain video planned. Something a little bit different. Something you want to know about me or the way I do things or whatever. Well, that's all I've really got to say, so enjoy the guide. Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers. Let's sit around the campfire together and talk about Dead by Daylight. Specifically about something a little out of my comfort zone. Something I get asked about more and more lately. At time of writing, the 10,000 subscriber milestone is fast approaching, and you all voted, in far greater numbers than I could ever have anticipated, for a gameplay guide for my main and favourite killer, the Plague, to celebrate that milestone. But before we get started, I want to indulge myself even more than this video will already be doing, and talk about my own history playing Dead by Daylight, and as a result, why the idea of even making this guide surprised me quite a bit. I'm far from the best player out there. I'm just about to hit 1,000 hours in Dead by Daylight, which, while respectable in the grand scheme of things, puts me in the kiddie pool of DBD content creators. Most of these people will have about 4,000 hours in the game, and I've probably been playing it pretty solidly since it came out, or at least the very early days. I only started playing when the Saw DLC came out because I was a Saw fanboy and the pig looked gnarly as fuck, and took 2 long breaks from the game, in between the Doctor rework and the release of the Stranger Things chapter, and then again between the Oni's release and the Silent Hill chapter. In the Dead by Daylight content creator landscape, I really am a bit of a lightweight, which is why it surprises me how often I get asked to make this sort of video, and how it won the 10,000 subscriber celebration video. Because, I'll be honest, I was 90% sure the Q&A session was going to be the winner. But I guess you guys want me to make a guide for my favourite killer, which is surprisingly flattering when I think about it. You guys want my advice on how to play this game when there are so many other killer guides that you could already use. Hell, the legend himself, Otstava, produced a pretty comprehensive Plague guide fairly recently. Yet, you asked me for one. So I did some thinking, and I came to the conclusion that whatever this guide turns out to be, I want it to be my guide, where I can bring something I can uniquely offer to the table. I'm not a god gamer, but what I am is a dedicated Plague main. One of a dying breed, because nobody, especially at high ranks, plays this killer anymore. And her egregiously low kill rate suggests that something is deeply wrong somewhere that maybe I could help with. Today, I'm going to be telling you everything you need to know to make some really sick plays. It sucks, that's so bad. So let me start by talking about why you might not want to play the Plague. Weird start, I know, but Plague has a reputation for being a bit of an acquired taste. She's certainly not for everybody, and that's okay. She has her shortcomings in certain areas that put a lot of people off playing her, so I'm just going to list the main ones now, as a warning to anyone who might try to get on the Plague train without knowing what you're letting yourself in for. The biggest reason I think people dislike the Plague so much is that she's the kind of killer who cannot give you instant value from your power at the start of the game. Many of the game's most beloved or widely played killers, such as Legion, Blight and Spirit, let you get into the meat and potatoes of the game without any wind-up or setup time required. As soon as you find the first survivor, you can get straight into the chase and getting value out of your power immediately. Plague is not that kind of killer. She's more in the family of Oni, Trapper, Hag and Michael Myers, where you have to basically set aside a very early game to set up from the later game, when you can start to assume control of the match and turn the tide in your favour. Effectively handing control of the early game to the survivors is something that a lot of players either don't have the confidence to do on a regular basis, or just find unsatisfying, maybe due to lack of patience or a naturally aggressive playstyle. With Plague, you'll be spending most of your early game getting everyone infected to get the measure of your opponents, not necessarily committing to many chases and using any corrupt pools you might have to try to corral survivors towards them. If you'd rather run in all guns blazing from the moment you load into the trial, the Plague probably isn't the killer for you. The other reason I think people find themselves leaving the Plague alone is a lack of consistency, partially due to the limited RNG of her pools of devotion and where they spawn, but mostly by the survivors having lots of input as to how you get to use your power. A lot of killer players don't like the sensation of not being able to go into a match with a consistent plan because the survivors can so easily force you to change tactics. If you play Plague, planning to do the same thing every game, you will get destroyed in most of your games, simply because survivors have all the agency they need to stop you doing that one thing. If you want a killer whose power is more reliant on your own input and where you can go in with the same plan every time, maybe another killer would be better suited to you. This does, however, lead into the reasons that I love the Plague, and as weird as it sounds, one of those reasons is her inconsistency. Playing Plague is like a box of chocolates, you never know what you're going to get, and that's part of her charm. Plague is a killer that demands you be versatile and capable of improvising perhaps more than any other killer in the game. And that can make playing her incredibly satisfying, because you get the kind of games that are more fun than you could ever have planned out in advance. Her demand for versatility also demands a fairly high level of skill in basically everything a killer could be asked to master. To consistently do well with Plague, you need to have the basics of looping down to beat teams that don't cleanse. You have to have good aim with a slow projectile to make the best use out of Corrupt Purge. You need to be good at economising your time because you don't have the speed to allow you to get away with overcommitting to the wrong target. And you need to do all of this while also bearing in mind how many corrupt pools you have, where they are, whether or not survivors are going to cleanse and where they're going to do it, how infected everybody is, tracking survivor locations or remembering infected objects, and the list goes on. Plague may not demand as much skill at one particular thing as a killer like the Nurse or the Blight, but to win with her consistently, you need to be at least pretty good at every skill a killer could have and be able to adapt on the fly. Bearing all that in mind and having it come together in the form of a win after win after win, there's just no feeling that beats it in my opinion. Her extreme reliance on game knowledge to probably a greater degree than any other killer in Dead by Daylight probably contributes to her kill rate being so low, but also makes the learning curve associated with her both very rewarding and gives you transferable skills to apply to other killers. Her inconsistency also makes her surprisingly hard for survivors to effectively counterplay, harder than most killers. For most killers, the counterplay is fairly obvious and usually works most of the time. For Bubba, for example, you want to play around windows or tight spots where he can't bring his chainsaw to bear. Or against Deathslinger, you want to break line of sight and pray to whichever gods you hold dear that your team is doing generators. In these cases, counterplay is usually very binary. It either works or it doesn't. The Plague isn't like that. What survivors must do to make the Plague have a hard time varies dramatically from game to game, from situation to situation. So whenever anyone asks me to counterplay to Plague, I struggle to answer, because one game, cleansing against a Plague could be very smart, but in the next game, cleansing could lose you the match. Just like the Plague player has to keep track of a lot of stuff to wrest control of the game from the survivors have to be on the ball to stop the Plague from capitalising on their mistakes and running them over. This is why Plague has one of the highest game sense requirements of any killer. She presents survivors with so many unpleasant decisions to make that inevitably they will make a choice that a good plague can exploit and bring them crumbling down. That's a gameplay style I really enjoy, and that's why Plague is the kind of killer you can keep coming back to. So let's start with something simple. How does Plague's power work? Well, your power button will charge up a stream of green vomit called Vile Purge, and you release the button once you've charged 25% or more of it, to release a stream that will hit all survivors in its arc of travel. It can hit multiple survivors at once and even goes through survivors. You can't body block this stuff. Even if a tiny bit of the stream hits you, survivors will become infected, causing them to cough. The Plague can also contaminate interactable objects with her Vile Purge. Those are lockers, generators, exit gate levers, pallets, windows, dropped items and chests. If survivors interact with these objects for 35 seconds after the Plague has contaminated them, they will become infected. She can also contaminate breakable walls, but since survivors can't interact with them, it doesn't actually have a practical purpose other than giving you a meagre amount of blood points. Once a survivor becomes infected, it's only a matter of time before the infection reaches a critical state. Eventually, a survivor will become fully infected, which is symbolised by the background over their icon going from green to red. A survivor who is fully infected will experience a number of things. The most noticeable thing being they will become injured and afflicted with the broken status effect, meaning they cannot heal normally to go back to healthy for as long as they remain infected. They will also periodically vomit between every 5 and 15 seconds, constantly emit copious green fumes, and will leave trails not just of blood, but also of vomit behind them. At full infection, survivors will also become vectors for the disease, meaning that any interactable object they touch will become contaminated and can infect other survivors. And any survivor who performs a cooperative action with them will be infected on contact. That includes unhooking or being unhooked by them, being healed by them, mending their deep wound or having them mend yours, picking them up off the ground, or working on a generator with them. This cross-contamination can only happen if the survivor is fully infected. Partial infection will not cause the disease to spread. Survivors only have one way to remove the disease and heal back up once infected: to cleanse the infection by performing an action similar to healing at a pool of devotion, one of 6 objects that will spawn with a somewhat random distribution around the map in any game with a plague. This will remove any amount of infection you have and heal you if you are injured, but the pool will become corrupted as its waters turn red. This renders the fountain unusable for later infected survivors and instead turns it into a tool for the plague to use. If a plague drinks the red and black water from a corrupted pool of devotion, her Vile Purge green vomit turns into Corrupt Purge, her red vomit, for 1 minute. In this mode, her vomit will no longer infect survivors, but instead damage them for a full health state, even if a tiny splash of it hits them. In terms of how you use it, Corrupt Purge functions almost identically to Vile Purge. You can still hit multiple survivors with one stream, and even shoot through survivors. The only real differences are that the same person cannot be damaged with the same stream more than once, and pallet stunning a Corrupt Purge plague will reset her back to Vile Purge. Notably, this only applies specifically to pallet stuns. Using Decisive Strike or Head-on to stun the killer, or using a flashlight or firecracker to blind them will not cancel the power, but pallet stunning the killer using Power Struggle still does the job. Normally, you can only get Corrupt Purge by drinking from one of these fountains, but if survivors make sure that all 6 pools become corrupted at the same time, all of them will reset back to being ordinary pools of devotion after 5 seconds. But the plague will also gain her 1 minute of Corrupt Purge immediately upon this happening. One pool of devotion also starts the game corrupted by default, and that number can be increased by add-ons. The Blessed or Ashen Apples will each give you an extra pool, and they do stack, so you can start the game with up to 3 corrupted pools if you so wish. This 6 pool reset mechanic and the 3 corrupt pools at the start is where most of the counterplay to a plague's power really becomes interesting for both sides. because the big question in every survivor's mind will inevitably be, do you cleanse against plague or not? I don't think that's a smart way to address the question. It should be, when do you cleanse against plague? Because there really isn't a yes or no answer. It all depends on how the plague is playing. Which brings me on to, well, actually playing her. Playing the plague usually starts off the same most games. You'll be spending the early game trying to get as many survivors as thoroughly infected as you can, to begin to present them with difficult choices as early as possible. That being said, you are absolutely still a threat in the 1v1 even at this early stage, since if you find yourself super close to a survivor, you can just keep vomiting on their back until they reach full infection, and then hit them with a basic attack to down them. You kind of want to treat this like you're back revving a hillbilly chainsaw, when you only want to commit to the full infection when you're on open ground, since you risk overcommitting to a down you might not get. But it's a useful tool to ensure survivors don't get a speed boost to get away after you injure them via full infection. Once again, spreading the infection early is key. The best way to do this is to find multiple survivors grouped together and spray on all of them at once, but that isn't always practical. Another way you can do this includes vomiting on generators or other interactables, which can double as a form of tracking, since you can see if a healthy survivor touched an object that you contaminated and retraced your steps to find the unlucky sod who put their hand in the stickiest of icky. One important point of order. Fully infecting one survivor who you then hook or slug can be incredibly powerful at this stage, since if they send a healthy person, they will become infected through contact. If they send someone who's already infected, the sickness will likely get worse as they traipse across the map to unhook, to the point they might get fully infected by the time they return to a generator. Once the team is infected and starting to break, each survivor is presented with two options: cleanse or don't cleanse. And your job as a plague player is to be ready to beat them no matter what they do. The best thing I can compare this to is the age-old problem known as the Morton's Fork. Named after John Morton, the Archbishop of Canterbury under King Henry VIII, a Morton's Fork is a form of false choice that presents multiple different options, but all the options ultimately lead to either the same undesirable outcome or different, equally undesirable outcomes. In effect, there's no right answer to a Morton's Fork. John Morton used this to weed out tax avoidance among landowners. If they were living extravagantly, they were clearly wealthy and could afford to pay their taxes to the king. But if they were living a more humble life, clearly they saved up a lot of money and could afford to pay their taxes to the king. Under the conditions Morton set up, there was really no way to win, and when played optimally, the plague offers a similarly futile choice to survivors deciding whether to cleanse or not. There are one of three things that survivors can do when the infection starts to set in. Cleanse en masse as a team constantly as much as they can in an attempt to stay healthy. Never cleanse and just play the game permanently broken for the rest of the trial, and denying you any further corrupt purges beyond the ones you start with, or a mixture of the two, where survivors periodically don't cleanse or do cleanse depending on the situation. This is most commonly done by survivors only cleansing when they're fully infected. Contrary to what people who don't play Plague very much might tell you, all three strategies have a decent chance of working out if the survivors do it right, or a decent chance of failure if the Plague in question can capitalise on whatever advantage the survivors are giving her. So let's talk about each scenario and talk through what the Plague player should do to get the best results in each of them. First, let's start with probably the most common option survivors will choose at high ranks. Never cleanse, so as to deny you access to additional corrupt purges. This is a strategy particularly favoured by veteran survivors or survive with friends groups, who usually have the skill, team coordination or busted perks to feel confident looping you long enough to waste your time, even when they're broken. To beat them, there's a few things you can do. The first one is most obvious. Get really solid as looping as a regular killer. This is where many Plague players come unstuck, because they think, oh, I'm a ranged killer, I don't need to know how to loop. Get off your high horse, yes you absolutely do, so sit down and listen. You need to know how to run common tiles and the basics of mind gaming, with the caveat that you're playing the tallest killer in the game, wearing a magnificent golden dress, and emitting more thick fumes than a 14-year-old with his first vape pen. So you can't try the same sneaking trick at certain loops that smaller killers like Legion or Ghostface can. But you do get thrown some very nice bones against teams who play like this. Mostly the altruism gets significantly harder when everyone is permanently injured. Nobody will be taking hits for their teammates who try and body block you. Nobody will be trying to 1-for-1 with their teammates because they can't just take a hit and power through for an unhook. This extends to getting greedy at loops as well. If a survivor steps a toe out of line and you swing through a pallet or catch them they weren't expecting to get hit, that's them immediately on the ground. Stealth plays also become worse for the survivors to make and more powerful for you to make. Iron Will, one of the most common and powerful survivor perks in the game, is almost totally useless against a plague, since it doesn't hide the coughing or retching sounds or the green fumes, and a fully infected survivor will go down like a sack of hammers if you can sneak up on them with a perk like Trail of Torment or Tinkerer and get a hit before they can react. There's also the matter of using your limited supply of corrupt purges at the right time. Even in a game where nobody is cleansing to deny you as many corrupted pools as possible, you can still get significant value out of the corrupt purge that you do have. You always start with 1, which with add-ons can be up to 3, and playing around them can be the difference between a crushing defeat or a spectacular victory. If you can corral survivors into having to go near a corrupt pool, maybe by hooking their teammate there or keeping any generators near that pool regressing so they have to come close to finish them, you can wipe out a whole team or at least break their back beyond recovery in a single fell swoop. Ironically, this is where coordinated survivors, who group up on a generator or bomb a hook, can crumble harder than those who play more individualistically. Since Corrupt Purge hits multiple targets and everyone's going to be injured, if that black vomit hits them, they're going down. If you're a good shot and know when to take the opportunity, Plague can slug an entire team within the 1-minute window, if you can get them into that fish in a barrel situation and pull off some spectacular turnaround plays. The other dominant school of thought, and one I've been seeing more and more lately, is super mega turbo cleansing. Trying to overload the pools of devotion to keep healthy constantly, while denying her many corrupt purges by corrupting all 6 pools at once is a very legitimate strategy that throws many plagues off guard, especially if they've just come from another killer to plague, and maybe haven't had enough experience with corrupt purge to make the most out of it. This is where your aim and ability to work around the terrain will be put to the test, because with constant access to corrupt purge, Plague is one of the most threatening killers in the game, up there with a Blood Fury Oni and a God Nurse, in terms of how quickly she can turn a team of survivors into a fine paste on the floor. The best way I can suggest doing this is to keep drinking from all the pools in one particular area if you can. Force any survivors who do get infected and want to cleanse to come to your territory to do so. Don't be afraid to drink from another pool when you've got a corrupt purge that still has some duration on it, just to ensure you bring the pain to wherever you need it to go. While you're technically losing out on corrupt purge time if you do this, arriving with most of a corrupt purge left at a location where survivors would expect you to almost be out can win a game by itself through the sheer surprise factor, and can be the nail in the coffin for a team trying to recover from being beaten down by the first corrupt purge. Notably, being healthy against corrupt purge isn't even that much better than being injured, since you can fire in short, sharp bursts of puke similar to Huntress's hatchets to hit them once, let them boost away, then recover and shoot them again before they can take cover. Playing Plague successfully like this is extremely skill testing and a little map dependent, but if done correctly, survivors will be dropping like flies very, very quickly. The third option is kind of a mix between the two, where survivors will cleanse as and when they feel they need to be healthy, but not so much that you constantly have corrupt purge ready. This most commonly happens when survivors try the first strategy and never cleanse, but some of them struggle too much at looping or feel they need the extra health state, so they cleanse, usually at faraway pools of devotion that might be hard for you to access. In these situations, what you should do is use corrupt purge to go after the team's weak links, the people who are staying broken. Not only will they go down faster due to only having one health state, their healthy teammates will also infect themselves when they unhook their broken bodies, requiring them to cleanse all over again and give you Corrupt Purge again. Ideally, you'll be wanting to hook survivors near corrupted pools, especially in the endgame, so that whoever bombs the hook can be downed without concern, whether they're healthy or infected. The golden number of pools devotion that I like to keep active for survivors to use in these circumstances is maybe 2, especially if they're in awkward spots for the survivors to get to, so they have to risk covering long distances while infected to cleanse themselves. Generally, this strategy is the least effective one for survivors to employ, and is the most common among disorganised survivors who don't want to commit to the same plan. But if you're not careful, it can really throw you off guard and give you the worst of both worlds, with limited access to Corrupt Purge as well as healthy survivors you have to deal with. So, now that we've covered general strategy, let's go into some specifics. My recommendations for perks, as well as the add-ons that go best with them, to make the Plague the best she can be. So let's start with my core perk build for the Plague. And I'll begin by saying this: Plague's teachables are fucking brilliant. Infectious Fright and Corrupt Intervention are both incredibly powerful killer perks, and despite Dark Devotion not being quite as good as them, it still has its uses in fun, niche builds, as well as being a staple on the Doctor. But not only are Infectious Fright and Corrupt Intervention amazing killer perks in general, they are also both exceptional on the Plague, making her probably the only killer in the game who has multiple of her own teachable perks that she actively wants to use. So let's start with the core of what I feel any Plague build would be incomplete without: Pop Goes the Weasel and Infectious Fright. There are a few killers who have enough power in their kits to play the game and do very well without any generator delaying perks whatsoever. Nurse, Spirit, Blight, maybe the Hillbilly or Freddy on a good day. The Plague is really not one of those killers. Her power takes a while to put in its full value, and a lot of the time you'll be chasing survivors normally, especially if they don't cleanse. Plague's power also doesn't allow her to directly pressure survivors off generators, so she's not really a killer who directly benefits from Hex Ruin. Even when Ruin Undying was the meta build for killers, I never really liked it on her, and I like it even less now it's been nerfed. Pop Goes the Weasel has been my favoured gen regression perk for the Plague ever since I started playing her. Being able to hook someone who's fully infected, and then send a generator into the Shadow Realm with Pop Goes the Weasel is so unreasonably strong. Especially if you then contaminate the gen, so that whoever goes back to work on it to stop the regression gets infected. Forcing survivors to keep going back to the same generator over and over again makes it more likely you'll be able to consistently keep their infection levels high. And if they group up on a generator to try to finish it before you can pop it, well, that's what Corrupt Purge is for. And Corrupt Purge would be incomplete without its platonic life partner, Infectious Fright. This perk can single-handedly win you the game off the back of a Corrupt Purge, since you can use it to chain downs from survivor to survivor, and have the whole team on the floor faster than Ted Cruz booking plane tickets. Against teams that constantly cleanse, this perk will be the bane of their existence. And if you're against a team that stays injured constantly, it will also help you get the best use out of the limited Corrupt Purge time that you do have. Plus, knowing where other survivors are when you down one broken victim is always useful information to have. You can just bonk people to death with your basic attack if they're injured and you catch them out with Infectious. Plus it's insurance against flashlight or pallet saves or sabotages. You really can't go wrong with it. The other two perks are very much flexible with what you want to do with them. In the past, I've enjoyed perks like Monitoring Abuse, Trail of Torment, I'm All Ears, Whispers, Discordance, and the constant staple Barbecue and Chili. I also quite like the combo of Hoarder and Franklin's Demise from time to time, as making survivors drop their items depletes their resources, waste their time as you go back for them, and gives you tracking as they pick up or replace them all at the same time. You can even contaminate dropped items or chests to infect survivors who might not see it coming and keep those infection levels high. But recently, I've grown used to the same build that I've been running for most games with the Plague lately, and in addition to Pop and Infectious, I find myself loving Corrupt Intervention. Plague struggles against survivor teams that spawn split apart on generators, since you will likely struggle to get split up survivors infected quickly, and early gens will likely fly by. This is doubly true on big maps that are hard to navigate for a killer without mobility, like Ormond, Mother's Dwelling, or Haddonfield. Corrupt Intervention is your insurance against DBD's map design being largely skewed in favour of highly mobile killers. It keeps survivors in the early game off distant generators, and gives you the best shot possible to get lots of early infections as you puke on one person and move on to the next, while they try to find a generator and the infection takes its toll. You can even contaminate entity block generators to leave a little surprise for whichever survivor tries to hop on once the blocker times out. So, Pop, Corrupt, Infectious, but what's the fourth perk? Well, here's the secret tech. My fourth perk is one that was born of my frustration with survivors and their insipid love of exhaustion perks, especially Dead Hard, that prolong the duration of chases far longer than the survivor in question has any right to. Pretty much every survivor under the sun runs one, and for the most part, killers really can't interact with them. Several killers who had add-ons that interacted directly with exhaustion, such as the Doctor and the Clown, have had those add-ons removed. And we have every reason to believe that the Huntress's Berus toxin hatchets that force exhaustion are likely to be removed with her upcoming add-on changes. This would leave the only two remaining add-ons that interact with exhaustion being Amanda's slow release toxin and Demo's lifeguard whistle. I'll be honest, they're not exactly on the level of some of the strongest survivor perks in the game that they're supposed to be countering. And Demogorgon's teachable perk Mindbreaker really isn't much better. Now let me introduce you to the fourth plague perk that I run almost every game, Blood Echo. An innocuous teachable perk from the Oni, and the only other option killers have to directly counter exhaustion perks. Perks like Sprint Burst, Lithe and Dead Hard are some of the strongest tools survivors can bring to any trial, but they're particularly good against the Plague since they artificially extend the duration of chases regardless of your health state. You can spend the entire game broken and refusing to cleanse, but your Sprint Burst will be unaffected. You can still just hold Shift and W as soon as you see the killer, and extend the duration of a chase by a very long time. In fact, being constantly injured actually makes Dead Hard slightly better, since you can always activate it, and again, there's nothing a lot of killers can do about it. Blood Echo messes with that safeguard survivors think they have quite substantially. Every time you hook someone, everyone else on the map who is injured will hemorrhage and bleed more until healed, but far more importantly, will become exhausted for 45 seconds. So if the survivors are the kind that just never cleanse and stay injured all game to try to deny you Corrupt Purge, they'll have to loop you not only missing a health state, but probably also missing their oh so precious exhaustion perks. Perks so strong, they can often be considered a third health state by themselves. And the most beautiful part is, survivors often don't really notice what's going on, at least not until it's too late. Blood Echo is an insidious perk. No, not that one. It doesn't make its effect very obvious to either the killer or the survivors immediately upon activation. But both of you will really feel it in the chase, when the survivor who thought they could get greedy with their Dead Hard, or walk in front of you to run away with Sprint Burst, suddenly realises that maybe they're not as smart as they think they are. If they figure out that staying injured is costing them their exhaustion perks, and therefore ending chases very quickly, they are liable to start cleansing, which, unless they all do it at once, leaves them liable to become infected from their teammates and throw the whole game into disarray. If you're upset with survivors outplaying you by pressing the E button or extending a chase by 20 seconds by holding shift, there's nothing quite like some Blood Echo Plague to wipe the smiles off their stupid faces. But of course, to get all this benefit, you need to get people infected quickly. And to do that, you must look at the Plague's add-ons. Fortunately, she's got some really nice ones. My favourite add-ons, and the ones I bring to almost every trial, are the Emetic family that increase the effectiveness of your Vile Purge. Your Green Vomit, by making it take survivors to full infection faster. The numbers on these are actually pretty beefy, with even the Yellow Emetic Potion giving a 20% increase in infection speed, and the purple one, the Vile Emetic, giving a chunky 40%. These make your early game significantly more dangerous, since every shot you land will take the survivor faster to that breaking point of full infection, and they make your 1v1 better by requiring less vomit on a given target to break them before hitting them for that down. Emetics are almost as core to Plague as Bags off a Trapper or Windstorm is for Wraith. The other family of Plague add-ons that deserve attention are the Apples. I talked about these earlier. They give you an extra corrupted pool at the start of the match, and the Ashen Apples increase how long objects stay contaminated, and a nice little bonus. I don't rate these as highly as other Plague players might, because I like to play in a way that forces survivors to cleanse, and apples can be actively harmful to you if survivors try to corrupt all 6 pools at once. I like them from time to time, but I'm not as attached to them as many Plague players are. But I have to admit, when they come in handy, they come in really handy. And they're still very good add-ons that I bring on a semi-regular basis. They're just not as core as the Emetics, I think. The cooldown add-ons are also pretty sweet, those being the Healing Salve, Potent Tincture, and Incensed Ointment. They reduce the time between your vomit stream ending and you being able to do other stuff, like attack, charge another stream, or break a pallet. These are very good in situations where you're in a chase and trying to vomit on a survivor's back to break them, since you can take them from healthy to broken to downed even more smoothly. The reduced cooldown also applies to Corrupt Purge, so you can get those all-important double hits with greater consistency. If you're not sure what to bring alongside Pneumatic but don't fancy an apple, these are a fine choice. But not as fine as the Rubbing Oil. I'll probably turn a few heads here when I say that Rubbing Oil is the Plague's version of the Oni's infamous Scalped Top Knot. But that really is the best way I can describe both the effect and the power level of that add-on. It significantly increases the charging up speed of your vomit attack, meaning you can shift between just walking normally and readying a shot extremely smoothly. It can let you drench someone that you're vomiting into the back of quickly like the cooldown add-ons. It lets you double tap with Corrupt Purge extremely effectively without losing distance to charge time. And the charging time is fast enough that you can bring Corrupt Purge to bear at places like rock loops, where otherwise it'd be hard to land a shot. Top Knot and Rubbing Oil both enable you to use your game-endingly strong, team-wiping power at way more places than you really should, and as such can allow some truly disgusting snowballing with infectious fright. Of course it doesn't have the busted reputation Top Knot does, simply because Oni is a much stronger killer than Plague, but the two add-ons I think are comparable in terms of how much they boost the power. Her other add-ons range from merely unremarkable to outright garbage, with the fortunate exception of her 2 ultra rares. Plague is blessed enough to be from the age when killer design allowed ultra rare add-ons to actually be good enough to run, so both the Black Incense and Iridescent Seal are more than just usable, they're actually extremely strong. Black Incense in particular is almost on Iridescent Head levels of unfairly busted. Since fully infected survivors vomit once every 5 to 15 seconds, and the aura reading of Black Incense lasts for 5 seconds, fully infected survivors spend an average of half their time in the game with you being able to see their aura, at any range, with no limitations or caveats, with no drawbacks. You just see them. It's great. Survivors now cannot hide from you before cleansing. They cannot do gens without you going to pressure them. They cannot go for an unhook without you being on your way to intercept. They can't mind game you at loops. They can't even go to cleanse at a fountain that you don't want them to, because you can cut them off when they move away. Slam this on with a pneumatic or severed toe, and you can basically do whatever you want. Play the game exactly how you want, because you have all the information you could ever need or want. Congratulations, it's the closest any killer will ever get to Object of Obsession. And about Eerie Seal. For a long time, I actually really slept on the seal, because I'd read that it sucked, and on paper it looked kinda gimmicky. Yeah, getting Corrupt Purge in every gen was done was cute and all, but making it harder to use and shortening the duration by a third, that seemed like too steep a cost to pay. Until I actually decided to try a build based around making it work. And then I realised just how powerful this add-on can be. It's the one time I take off Infectious Fright on Plague, which might seem counterintuitive, given you'll be getting downs with Corrupt Purge more regularly than usual. But you take off Infectious Fright because it has anti-synergy with a perk that, for this build, is even better. And that perk is Tinkerer. Tinkerer not only lets you know when a generator is about to be completed, but hides your approach, so you can get into position for the other perk that's about to slap these poor shitters into next week. Rancor reveals the location of all survivors on the map when a generator is completed, but reveals your aura to the Obsession, which would be a whole lot more of a problem if Tinkerer didn't hide you from survivor aura reading in the first place, completely removing the perk downside. If you can't see where this is going, let me summarise it like this. You are given advance warning when a generator is about to be completed, so you advance towards it without a terror radius. Either you get there before it is completed, in which case, great, you can pressure them off of it with threat of a full infection or a down. Or if it gets completed as you get there, you see the locations of every survivor on the map, and you get Corrupt Purge instantly. You don't need Infectious Fright when you can see everyone, no matter where they're hiding. Slap on pop goes the Weasel, to push gens back below the 70% Tinkerer threshold, and Discordance to direct you to generators you might want to keep an eye on, or Thrilling Tremors to give advanced warning plus blocking off distant gens. Throw in a Metic, Rubbing Oil or Cooldown add-on, and you have yourself a very, very nasty build, capable of taking survivors completely by surprise, and playing in a way no one will ever expect a play to do. Although I've also found the Worship Tablet to be useful here, to offset the movement speed reduction you get from the Iridescent Seal. I have a VOD from a stream a little while ago, where I played with this build and got immense value out of it. So if you're interested in seeing how this build plays out, the link will be in the card up top now. So finally, after a geological epoch and 7,500 words, let's wrap everything up. As anyone who's watched me stream Dead by Daylight, or heard my rampant fits of simping in my videos in the Discord server, on my Twitter, at the bus stop, to literally anyone who will listen, you will know by now that my favourite killer is the Plague, by an absolutely colossal margin. Whether you're a newcomer to Dead by Daylight altogether, or to try out a new killer, or a novice Plague looking to hone your skills or pick up some tips, I hope this video has been of some value to you. Because I tell you what, it's been immensely valuable to me. This video has been a love letter to the most fun I've ever had playing an online game. The years I put into playing this game, playing the Plague and just having the time of my life. If it wasn't for this killer, I probably wouldn't have come back to the game after my year's break, and I wouldn't have made the channel that's brought me so much joy these past few months. There's a reason I saved this for 10k, because it's my memories of the past couple of years that I've been enamoured with this game, extracted and bottled, in case someone might find it useful. And this guide, in all its enormity, is a love letter to all of you. You all gave me the time of day. You all thought I was worth listening to. All 10,000 of you. So you press that little subscribe button, and that means so much more to me than I can say. I know I say this all the time, but thank you. Really. And I hope to see you all at the next big milestone. 15k, 20k, wherever that may be. So I mean it when I say, have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye for now.